Let's talk a little bit about the Ozarks and stereotypes. I sometimes, in some of the classes I do on the Ozarks, it's one of the first things we talk about the first week of class. I don't remember that we did that much in this class this semester, maybe just a little bit. But what are the things that a lot of people think of when they think of the Ozarks, or people in the Ozarks especially? What are some of the common characteristics you would expect of a hillbilly? Backward? Okay, bib overalls, barefoot, uneducated, poor, straw hat, pipe, yeah. Pipe is good. Got to have a banjo. Yeah, if you're packing a musical instrument, banjo's as good as anything. Moonshine. Lazy, yeah. Yeah, that's probably. What are we describing? What gender of a person are we describing here? Okay. But if we're doing race and gender, it's probably a white man that we're talking about. When you just throw the term hillbilly out, for most people that's what comes to mind. Some image of a white guy who fits the characteristics we just talked about. You can have hillbilly women. And there was a professor at the University of Arkansas several years ago who wrote a book called Black Hillbillies, or Black Hillbillies of the Ozarks, something like that. But it's not the first thing that comes to mind. We know that from our last topic, diversity in the Ozarks, that there were black people in the Ozarks. There are lots of people of Hispanic descent in the Ozarks today, but those people generally don't come to mind when you think of hillbilly. You have kind of a certain idea in mind. If you're from the Ozarks, are you offended by hillbilly stereotypes, by hillbilly caricatures? Okay, so you think that hillbilly is more or less an innocuous term that doesn't necessarily offend, but if somebody calls you a redneck, that has more of a sinister meaning to it. So there are differences. Hillbillies and rednecks have differences. Yeah. What? Well, how would you characterize a redneck then? How would he or she differ?
I think a lot of the intelligence level, things like that would be the same, but more of the appearance changes and the interests. I wouldn't necessarily think of moonshine, but more like NASCAR and things
NASCAR.
Like that. But yeah.
Okay. So a different appearance, different interests.
Yeah.
NASCAR, and as you said, redneck you consider more of like a current term as opposed to hillbillies. The caricature that we've drawn here, not so much a current sort of thing, more of a historical figure, maybe.
Rednecks are not very tall.
Yes.
That's a good point. Redneck is a term we often associate with racism, intolerance.
Yes. Rather be a hillbilly than a redneck.
You don't associate that with hillbillies?
There's a little crossover, but
Yeah.
I would say hillbillies as being real peaceful, just outdoorsy.
Okay. Yeah. Close to nature.
I'd rather meet a hillbilly than a redneck, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
You'd rather meet a hillbilly than a redneck?
Or hang out with a hillbilly.
Right. I wasn't sure if you said I'd rather be a hillbilly than a redneck, or I guess it makes sense though, either one.
Yeah.
You'd rather be or meet one.
Like we discussed one time, Ma and Pa Kettle.
Right.
And that's the lazy guy and the hard-working woman.
Yeah.
They seem to get along with everybody.
Right.
The ritzies that they did, whatever.
The kettles, we'll actually see the kettles on here. If I didn't take it off of our slideshow, that's good examples. Ma and Paul Kettle from the 1950s movies.
My family's they all live in Kansas.
Uh-huh.
And they consider themselves country, but we're hillbillies and rednecks. So that's
Right.
just because we live in Missouri, but they're not.
They're just
country.
Kansas people are country. They're not hillbillies or rednecks.
For some reason, they consider Missourians to be more
Yeah.
of the hillbillies.
Well, I guess if you wanted to be technical about it, a hillbilly is someone who lives in the hills. You know, if you want to really go by the word, and most people in Kansas, even country people, wouldn't qualify with that. So maybe the Flint Hills.
Basically agriculturists, isn't that what that is? Isn't that where they got that name?
Is that what you think of?
Well, from bending over and working, and they get
right.
sunburned on their neck. I thought
Yeah.
that's where it kind of came from. So if you really
Yeah.
get the roots.
That's origin of the word. That's one explanation, probably as good as any explanation for where the term redneck comes from. Yeah. And do you think of rednecks though? If you think of the term redneck today, does a farmer come to mind? Yeah, it's sort of morphed, hadn't it? The term redneck has kind of taken on a different.
What's that comedian that
I
does?
was about to say, was it-
Jeff Foxworthy?
all
Jeff
those-
Foxworthy.
Yeah.
You're a redneck if.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That guy has become filthy rich on these redneck jokes.
He's really built that redneck stereotype with the NASCAR and the
Yeah. Yeah.
this and that of kind of that lower class country life.
Yeah, and I think today that for a lot of people, in the media or pop culture, TV, movies, stuff like that, in some ways, redneck and hillbilly and all these different sort of negative terms for poor whites have started to merge into one. I think they're more interchangeable today than they used to be. They have less, at least when you don't live in the Ozarks, or you're not from Appalachia or one of these places where you kind of deal with that stereotype all the time. If you're from LA or Chicago or New York or somewhere like that, probably a lot of these words, they just all mean the same thing to you. And I still, the other night, I don't even remember what I was watching. I think it was some sitcom or something on TV in prime time, and somebody called one of the other characters a hillbilly or said something about a hillbilly on there. So it's still something that's widely used in pop culture today, even though we don't all agree on what it is or how negative it is. But for those of you who are natives of the region, would you be offended if someone called you a hillbilly?
I mean, I'm not from here, but I've been here long enough to give it some thought, man.
Yeah. Would it depend on who called you hillbilly? And that works with a lot of things. A lot of it depends on who's saying it. If you're talking about ethnic or racial stereotypes and epithets, some people can use them, some people can't, and part of it is being part of the group. If I use the term hillbilly or call one of my friends a hillbilly or something like that, it's probably going to be used in a lot different way than, say, somebody from New York who's passing through and gets mad at you at the gas station or something and calls you a hillbilly. Then you're ready to fight when that happens, right?
Well, that's where we just stereotype them as a stuck-up city slicker or something like that.
Right.
You
Yeah.
have to think in reverse too. How do we stereotype?
Yeah, and that's
big cities?
right. And we certainly, to a certain degree, we all stereotype almost everybody out there. And certainly people in the country have plenty of stereotypes about city people that aren't always near the mark either. Just assumptions that you make, and that kind of leads into it. So if you're expecting somebody from up north or somebody from a city to be rude and disrespectful to you, and they call you a hillbilly, then it's on at that point.
Billy. Oh.
It's well, that's interesting, Millie. I'm glad you. Millie says that she can't think of any instance where hillbilly would be complimentary, would be have a positive connotation, and there are. We can think of racial epithets that really have no positive connotations either, but people use them in what are meant to be positive ways sometimes. People within the group use them. And that's what I'm talking about with hillbilly. You hear lots of people from the Ozarks, from Appalachia, refer to themselves as hillbilly. And for them, it means something closer to what Lacey was talking about, something, maybe somebody who spends a lot of time outdoors. They're kind of outdoorsy people. They're close to the earth. They're survivors. They're nonconformists. And you do see a lot of people who say, well, I'm just an old hillbilly. And for them, they have a positive connotation of that. They're not necessarily thinking of the drunk moonshiner laying, using his hound dog for a pillow, that kind of thing. And it has, as we go through this, we'll see that there's a whole other element, there's a whole other side of that stereotype that lots of natives have used, and some outsiders too, to kind of celebrate the hillbilly as someone who isn't like cookie cutter suburban American, who is different, who's unique in some way, and is therefore worthy of at least some esteem, even if it's not in general a positive term. So again, a lot of it depends on who's using it. If it's for someone from Michigan or someone from outside of the Ozarks or Appalachia, there may be no positive way to use hillbilly, unless you're a back to the lander, and we'll get to them in a minute. But for plenty of people in Missouri and Arkansas and Oklahoma, the term hillbilly just has a different meaning. It's something that they have what we call co-opted, where you co-opt something that traditionally has been used to demean you, and you just change the meaning of it, and it becomes something that it becomes a point of pride at that point. It doesn't mean that everybody does that. More than likely, the Chamber of Commerce of Springfield, Missouri, is not going to start referring to themselves as hillbillies, but a lot of people have taken the term and kind of run with it and made it their own term of pride in the Ozarks. So, yeah.
I think I would take exception to being called a hillbilly. Not that I don't want to be a hillbilly, but I don't view myself as a
Right.
hillbilly.
Well, again, if a hillbilly is the person we described at the beginning of this, the person who moonshines and barefoot and uneducated and lazy and all that kind of stuff, most of us are not going to, we're going to agree with Millie and not want
I do fit
to
some
be
of
called
those,
that. Oh, we probably all fit one or two things, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can go through the Jeff Foxworthy's Redneck books and find a couple that you think, it's a little too close to home for me. But if you have a different definition of what a hillbilly is, a more positive definition, then you might not be so upset about calling yourself a hillbilly. Again, being called a hillbilly can be a completely different thing. That's if it's someone who's doing it as a way of disrespecting you, then certainly, And hillbillies generally like to fight, so that could be a good thing. If it results in a fight, then you might be happy. It's odd how these things can work out to the benefit.